Blart 1. Paul Blart is impossible to underestimate, and I know that because I tried to. Some background. Originally, I wanted to make a video looking at Paul Blart as propaganda for April Fool's Day last year. But what I didn't realize is just how hard I'd be playing myself trying to do that. I was keeping up with the great Skip intro series on propaganda throughout the decades. I think my friends liked my Man of Steel video, and April 1st was rapidly approaching. So I asked my friend Tony for a video suggestion, and I figured, what better time than now? What I didn't count on, unfortunately, is that besides taking almost a year to record the fucking script, Paul Blart Mall Cop doesn't say anything about cops, or anything else, really, and so it's become uniquely inert as a close reading of propaganda, even in meme format, and yet somehow, miraculously, not for lack of trying. Anyway, I wasted about 6 hours in the land of Blart, and this is what I learned. Paul Blart is a messy movie that has a lot going on and nothing to show for it, as simple as it is. Produced by Adam Sandler's Happy Madison Productions and directed by Steve Carr, who also directed Daddy Daycare and Are We Done Yet, on an estimated budget of about $26 million, there is shockingly little coverage about the production side of Paul Blart Mall Cop, and everything I could find in the way of interviews and behind-the-scenes discussion is about as painful to watch as the movie itself.
Where did you get all of the ideas for the mall and having these terrorists in the mall and having a daughter from an illegal immigrant? There are just some little things in here that are just hysterical.
The only accolade I could find, in fact, is that it's the first Happy Madison movie not to feature the Sandman and still break $100 million at the box office, which is impressive unless you're Adam Sandler.
This is how I win. All right?
Regardless, the movie was created as a joint venture between Adam Sandler and Kevin James, who've worked on films together many times, and somehow, miraculously, it opened at number 1, where it remained throughout its opening weekend and into the following. And the rest is history, I hope. Approaching Paul Blart as a matter of critique is kind of a difficult thing to do, it turns out, so I'm going to focus on taking the movie and its creators at their word for this. Kevin James wrote and starred in this movie, and so I'm going to try to engage with Kevin James on all levels of his involvement here, on the assumption that he at least knows and cares somewhat about the movie he's making, that he fundamentally believes enough in the success of this character to censor a movie around him. So that's the headcanon framework we're going with for this one, which I acknowledge is a mistake. And speaking of mistakes, Blart 2, explaining the joke. Movies like Paul Blart live and die by their main characters. The entire draw of a movie like this is supposed to be seeing what a comedian like Kevin James can bring to a role like Blart. Acting vehicles for comedians aren't anything new, but the synthesis between character and actor in movies like this are absolutely make or break. Character-actor combos like Jim Carrey as Ace Ventura or Ben Stiller as Derek Zoolander and even Adam Sandler's Happy Gilmore come to mind. I don't think that Kevin James' Paul Blart is quite as capable if it comes down to scratching that same itch. But with that being understood, let's dive in. We learn that Paul is fat. We learn that despite being fat, he's somewhat capable physically. And finally, we learn about his hypoglycemia. Then, we learn that Paul is lonely. He's been trying to become a cop for some time, that he lives with his supportive mom and daughter, and that they want him to start dating again so he can stop being so lonely. I think what we're meant to take away from this is that Paul Blart is a well-intentioned but self-conscious fool whose growth is largely contingent upon how he thinks he comes across to other people. He's a good guy who's desperate to be taken seriously, or at least that's what the movie wants us to think. Keep in mind, we still have no idea why Blart wants to be a cop, other than that he gets shit on by them for being a security guard at the mall. Actually, this is the beginning of what we'll see as the movie's ethos of telling rather than showing. We only learn that the cops shit-talk Blart through his words, despite the fact that he was surrounded by them in the scene 5 seconds prior. Either way, this is how the movie treats Paul Blart. A sad sack, lovable goof with an alleged heart of gold, whose confidence in life would benefit greatly if he could only see what's in himself. This beckons both the movie and the audience to answer the question. Blart 3. Wherefore Blart thou? The central lie that makes Paul Blart the movie so unbearable is the contradictory tension between what the movie tells us and what the movie shows us when it comes to Paul Blart the man. As we've established, the movie, its writers, and presumably Kevin James himself, treat Paul Blart like a lovable goof who's trying to do the right thing in spite of insurmountable odds for a guy like him. But let's take a look at what we actually get to see Blart do during a day in the life. We watch him run over a dog without stopping, wax poetic about the existential nature of the job to a new hire without offering any actual advice, act overzealously and harass an old dude on a scooter for speeding despite a lack of signage, use his power of authority to creepily spy on Amy, a woman he's interested in, played by professional discount Anna Faris Jayma Mays, and then use that knowledge and power to force her into a conversation during which she's clearly uncomfortable. He fights a lady shopper after he escalates a nonviolent situation and calls her fat, abuses his power and surveillance authority again to spy on Amy again so he can give her a ride on his Segway, which she inexplicably accepts, and then proceeds to meet her and some other coworkers at a bar where he gets absolutely fucking destroyed, acts like a pig, and embarrasses all of his friends and coworkers before eating shit out a window. Damn, maybe this should have been a Copaganda episode after all. It's telling that I can only recall a single moment when I actively rooted for Paul Blart. There's a part right after Paul gets to the bar. He's stumbled a bit trying to talk to Amy, but seems to have leveled out a little. We see him having this nacho eating contest with a friend, and while I was watching, I thought to myself, oh shit, we finally get to see Paul relate to somebody over something. He has a friend, he's good at something, only to have my hopes go the same way as the nacho. Down Kevin James Gullet, never to be referenced again. I'm not exaggerating either. Those 5 seconds were legitimately my favorite part of the movie every time I watched it. But I digress. Are you starting to get a sense of the picture here? There's an absolutely fundamental disconnect between how the movie treats Paul Blart with regard to who he really is and what the movie chooses to show him actually doing. He's a completely unlikable piece of shit, and the movie breaks its own back trying to justify why anybody would root for this asshat to the audience. The inescapable answer to all of the problems in Paul Blart's life is to simply stop being Paul Blart. Paul Blart has trouble with women? Maybe he shouldn't be such a fucking creep and should stop horny spying on people from the little surveillance room in the back of the mall. Paul Blart has trouble becoming a cop? Maybe he shouldn't abuse the little authority and power already afforded to him by using the tools of the trade to horny spy on strangers, and maybe he should stop pretending he's got a gun while he's at it.
Right hand on your away hip thusly, giving the illusion that you have a gun, which of course we both know you don't.
Paul has trouble making friends? Maybe he should stop being such a self-obsessed narcissist and invest even a fraction of himself beyond his masturbatory quest for glory and recognition vis-a-vis copdom. The movie constantly establishes shit about Blart that never comes back to mean anything because the script, like Blart himself, is both stupid and self-congratulatory. Which brings us to our next stop along the Paul Blart Express. Blart 4, Ride Along. Much like the man himself, the movie surrounding Mr. Blart is confusing, deeply unfunny, and suffers from what seem to be obvious, easily avoidable problems. When it comes to the sum total of a movie's experience, there's a lot that can shift the total outcome of that experience, but nothing more so, in my opinion, than a bad script. Bad scripts are usually indicative of an overall lack of achievement in the writing department. There are either too many cooks in the kitchen, the script's scope lacks focus, there can be budgetary restrictions, studio mandates, etc., but I'm not sure that Paul Blart actually suffers from any of these more complicated problems. In fact, I think the solution is pretty uncomplicated. I think that Kevin James probably just sucks at writing. There's a weird synergist parallel between the writing issues which plague Blart the man and Blart the movie, which really hammers home for me the idea that Kevin James has no idea how to write a movie script, relatable characters, or comedic set pieces. If the fundamental contradiction of Paul Blart as a character is the disconnect between the intended and actual audience reception, the script around him suffers from the inverse problem, in which it actively refuses any semblance of meaning that could stem from the structure of its plot in the most literal sense. Which is to say that the structure of the movie is as superfluous as Paul's positive traits. For example, There's an early scene where Blart has to train the new up-and-coming security guard, Vec Sims, which is not a name, in the art of mall copping. We watch Paul zip and zoom around a labyrinthian set of hallways on his Segway, while the fresh-faced Sims struggles to keep up, with Blart constantly popping up from different angles to continue offering his sage wisdom to Sims, who he doesn't know will be taking the mall hostage in a few days' time. The scene is deliberate in playing up the dichotomy between Blart's deep knowledge of the mall compared to Sim's naivete, to such a degree that surely the audience would expect a payoff to this dynamic later in the movie, right? Like, maybe after Sims has taken the mall hostage and decides to deal with Blart himself, we could get a callback to this scene, one in which the mildly humorous, which is an over-exaggeration, dynamic between Blart and Sims is flipped on its head in a way that throws the arrogant Sims on his back foot in a paranoid, constant lookout for Blart, who could be lurking in any of the shadows on his Segway waiting to strike. Instead, it literally never comes up again. Maybe Paul even uses the mall cop oath sign above the entryway that the movie goes out of its way to show us, since Paul hits it every time he goes under it, saying, "Slap it, honor it." He says it directly to Sims, the first and only time we see the sign in the movie.
Slap it, honor it.
Let's look at another example, just for fun. About halfway through the movie, we get introduced to State Trooper James Kent. Kent is your typical smug Fed once he arrives on the scene, and knows who Blart is as soon as his name is mentioned. Now, you might recall, the very first scene of the movie literally shows Blart failing his test to become a state trooper. Maybe you recall that Blart mentioned that he's goose egg for 8 attempts at becoming a New Jersey state trooper, making an attempt once a year, every year, for the past 8 years.
Working on becoming a state trooper myself. Right now I'm goose egg for 8, hypoglycemia.
Maybe you're of the opinion that all of this state trooper nonsense the movie devotes time to might have something to do with or involve James Kent in some way. Presumably, he'd know who Paul is after 8 years of failed exam attempts, right? Fuck no, and you're stupid for thinking that, because according to Kevin James' Galaxy Brain scripting, this asshole just happens to know and remember specific details about the 38-year-old Paul Blart because they went to high school together, and for literally no other reason than that. The movie even has the gall to make this guy a secondary antagonist working with Sims out of fucking nowhere right at the end, too. They make him gloat at Blart and shit, recalling how Kent would apparently bully Blart in high school, which has fuck all to do with the fact that he's the state trooper Paul largely wants to be. There aren't any lessons for Paul to learn about the true secret nature of being a Fed here. There's no explanation as to why Sims and Kent are working together at all either, let alone anything approaching revelatory or coherent. The movie goes out of its way to prove to you that you, the person watching it, are a fucking idiot for thinking you know what to expect when the movie's dropping obvious hints and parallels. You want logical consistency? Eat shit, coward. Paul's here to rearrange your marbles. I can't even imagine what happened or what went wrong here to get us to this point, which is why I've arrived at the inescapable conclusion that Kevin James simply has no idea what he's doing, and now neither do I, and with that comes the realization that he wants me both to suffer and to like it, and maybe one day I can make that dream come true for him. Blart 5. Pain is my co-pilot. This video was supposed to come out 20 days ago, according to the script I wrote 9 months ago, and I still have to finish recording the voiceover, finish sourcing my clips, and find video editing software that lets me edit more than 5 seconds of video per minute.
Okay, so now let's get familiar with the user interface.
No, just teach me to edit!
I cannot stand to think or write about this stupid-ass movie anymore. I can't read the intention behind the labor here in the slightest, and maybe that's the most infuriating part, because it has been impossible. How charitable of a case can I make for a movie I'm trying to take in good faith when it seems to actively go out of its way to treat me like I'm an idiot? Why doesn't Kevin James hate Paul Blart? What's the takeaway from all of this? Maybe it's sometimes that there aren't any easy answers. I spent 6 hours in the land of Blart. 6 hours of trying to engage with this movie like a movie, trying to force myself to laugh, saying to myself, okay, when are they going to tie that in? How's that going to work out? I ruined my own skate cred because I realized that Mike Vallely was in this movie after the fact. only to be immediately confronted with the harsh reality that I am old as shit because none of my friends or coworkers knew who that was. Paul Blart Mall Cop is a series of marginally related scenes and half-cobbled ideas blarted straight out of Kevin James' ass onto the silver screen to give the impression of comedy. I recognize that may sound harsh, but when's the last time you watched it? Okay, this is a weird unscripted tangent, but this movie is really fucking weird. Like, I don't understand so much of what it's trying to do. There's this part with Vec when they're taking over the mall for the first time and you realize he's a bad guy. And he takes off his jacket and he's wearing these fucking Ed Hardy sleeves, like, that are supposed to codify him as the bad guy. And it's like, okay, what the fuck? Like, if you're not gonna paint the tattoos on him, you know, just give him, just don't give him fucking tattoos. Don't give him Ed Hardy sleeves. Are they supposed to be like a joke? Is it supposed to be funny that, like, this guy has Ed Hardy sleeves, but then no one says anything about it? It does. It's the same thing with the skateboarding terrorists, where they're like just going everywhere. They're doing stunts for like no good reason. I don't understand, like, the universe of the movie. I don't know, man. It's really, really weird. It's super surreal. I just had to say that. There's a lot I didn't get to touch on, again, and I'm sorry for being overwhelmingly negative, but I guess I'm just airing my grievances at this point. So here's a quick lightning round. This would have been a bigger point for a more deserving movie, but it really is the epitome of unfunny. Paul Blart's sense of humor on the whole somehow manages to be completely toothless while still managing to be irreparably offensive, all without actually attempting to be either. It's like an idiot's idea of comedy. Hypoglycemia is funny because he's fat, and it makes him so random. XD Pahood is so funny because he's tracking an underage girl's phone without her consent or knowledge. Of course, this is the only plot thread that actually comes back to be useful. What are the odds? Could you even imagine? Ha ha ha, what a wacky and fun situation. The joke is that he's a mall cop. That'll be great for mileage. I like to imagine Kevin James is in an apartment somewhere laying on a couch while he spitballs ideas to someone who knows how to write them down. You know, what if Paul's wife was an immigrant who left him after getting a green card? Ha ha ha, don't you hate when the immigrants do that? Write that shit down and get a laugh on Queens. The movie is also, and we're really stretching this definition, a Die Hard spoof in the second half, in the way that Blart has to take down an invading force of terrorists using his wit and the tools at his disposal. It takes place on Black Friday too, so the mall can be decked out in holiday swag to complete the homage. The why it couldn't just be set during the regular holiday season escapes me, since we don't see any Black Friday shopping happen. Speaking of swag, let's scope out some of the sweet product placement you can find all over the West Orange Pavilion Mall real quick. So, after all of this, the pain, the strife, the mental gymnastics, what kind of deterministic hellhole of a conclusion can we land on? Where do we go from here? If you're Kevin James, I guess it's 2 weeks of being number one at the box office and then off to Vegas to film the sequel 4 years later. If you're me, I guess it's that no matter how high you get, how hard you try to laugh, how charitable you try and be to a movie's creative team and direction, there is an inescapable truth in that Paul Blart really is impossible to underestimate, and that pain really has become my co-pilot. Hi everybody. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you liked it. I liked making it. It took me like a year to get this one out. I wrote the script like a year ago. Having not watched Paul Blart since then, other than in editing, none of my opinions have changed. It's still a horrible movie. It's a horrible viewing experience. I wouldn't recommend doing this to yourself. But yeah, so moving forward, I have a setup now, so I should hopefully be able to churn these out with a little more consistency. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to cover next or when I'm aiming to have another one out, but I think within like the next month probably I'll at least have a script written and maybe edited. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good one. Oh, right, like and subscribe. I'm supposed to say that. Bye.